And good afternoon. This is David Friedman, co-host of TCA Crossroads with my friend and guest and co-host Dave Berkus. How are you, Dave?
That's me, and I'm doing great, dude. Good to see you.
Yeah, I look at the library behind you and I'm really impressed, but I do not see the spline of my book that you helped me publish, by the way, just to let you know.
Well, thanks for that nod, but it's not a realistic background. You know, that's just one of those things to throw up there. So none of those books are mine.
But boy, I'll tell you, it's impressive. Actually, for the audience, Dave has probably written more than the number of books that are behind him. So fundamentally, it may not be totally true, but it's kind of realistic in many ways. But I'm really excited today. And I'm excited for a reason that we keep hearing from entrepreneurs. And we also hear from investors what we should do right, what we should do wrong. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't think the entrepreneur really listens. We're going to cover the best advice entrepreneurs kind of never follow. But the second part of it is, if they followed advice, what would that be? So we're going to look in the second section, which is going to be a separate podcast, but we're going to look at what are the 10 key areas or 11 key areas for success in a startup, because this will affect not only the entrepreneur, hopefully they listen, and hopefully the investors get some keys off of this so they can ask more intelligent questions in their discussions and in their due diligence. How does that sound?
Perfect. That's a great setup. I want to hear both of them. Well, wait a minute. I'm going to be part of both.
Well, you're going to be presenting it. Yeah. I mean, you should, hopefully, the topic. I mean, but let's put some of the slides up and we're going to have an interesting dialogue. I'm going to key off of your points and we'll try to come up with some examples that would resonate with the listeners.
All right, David. So the answer is, this is the best advice that startups will never follow. And the first one is one of my favorites. Don't take money from relatives, friends, and family who can't afford to walk away without remorse. I mean, this is one where I almost am afraid for the entrepreneur, because sometimes they'll just take that money because it's easy to get and relatives will trust you to a great degree. But there's a common expectation among relatives that they want their money back if something fails. I've had it happen before. I've seen it happen before. And we want to make sure that any entrepreneur that tries to take friends and family money, ask that question 3 times. Do you really want to do this? And can you afford to do it? If I fail, I'm going to feel awful. But if I succeed, I'm going to feel great. Are you still okay? And if you ask a 3rd time and they say yes, then I think that's probably enough. Friends and family can do it. So I'm going to throw this over to you, David. What do you think about that bold statement?
Well, we always ask, the entrepreneur whether or not he's asked for friends and family before they get to our round, because we figure if your family is not investing, they're not as secure in your idea. But I totally agree with you that it's difficult to ask relatives. What I do and what I have recommended to people is throw a party and have that party saying, I have an idea. I have this great dream. And what I'd like you to do is give me feedback. And maybe somebody that would be interested. So you're not actually trying to get money. You're trying to leave it up to them to give you money. But I like your idea.
I like your idea. Hey, this one works.
We'll add that to slide 12.
Okay, and the second one is, don't take money, especially startup loans, from unsophisticated investors. And you got to think about this one, because if you take money from unsophisticated investors, they often think it's like the stock market. They can get it back right away. Or it's going to happen and you're going to make money, so I'm going to make money. The problem is obvious, that sometimes some of those investors are going to feel bad. I have a story really fast, and I'll throw it to you, and I'll bet you have some too. And
no, go ahead. Go ahead with your story.
My favorite story, and I hope the person isn't listening right now, is the cousin of the entrepreneur sued his cousin, who was the entrepreneur, sued the company, sued me, sued my wife, sued my family trust over the $100,000 he put in. And it's a longer story than that. but it's the only suit that I've ever had to settle in my life. I didn't want my wife on the stand. I didn't want this to go to trial. And I think his attorney knew it. So this was an unsophisticated investor that said, I want my money back. You ever heard that one, David?
Oh, I've certainly heard that. The other problem with an unsophisticated investor is they want more and more and more information without contributing anything. They get more concerned the longer it goes, and if you haven't hit your milestones, they're getting even more concerned. So let's go on to number 3.
I like that one, by the way. So get them to purchase equity instead of loans. And so the answer, the way I'd like to phrase that is, don't take loans from sophisticated investors unless you've already tried every way to get equity from them. There are reasons for this. And one of those is, if you are an investor, you probably know about Rule 1202. In other words, if you hold this investment for 5 years, federal income tax is 0. Not a bad thing for the investor at all. But if you do it in the form of a loan, that clock doesn't start. So we investors would rather we get it for equity than a loan. And my final statement about that is, I can't remember out of my 208 investments one time when I've collected on a loan in bankruptcy. So
yeah. So I have an interesting thought on that one, and it goes to the 1202. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because from an investor point of view, we would love to get equity and hold it for 5 years and 1 day, so we can get that tax break. Again, it's federal tax break, not state tax break, but
right.
Still a huge number. But when a lot of the early stage companies start using safes and they start using convertible notes, and normally, as you pointed out, there's a very small chance that there's a lot of cash flow to pay interest. And secondly, with a 1202, the convertible note has to be converted to start that clock. So if you have a convertible note for 2 years, you have to still wait another 5 to collect on 1202.
And can I go further? A safe
Sure.
is neither debt nor equity. It's Neverland. Your accountant may tell you it's debt, and the IRS may not. You just take a real chance if you play the game with safes. I am very much against them, as you can hear. Number 4, don't talk yourself into high valuation for the first round of financing for any reason, even if your hair's on fire and the idea is worth billions, because it's a first round, and the opportunity for that first round to end up with a lot of money in the end for you and the investor, it isn't a very high percentage. So let's do a good job of pricing that first round right and make everybody feel good, including the investor.
So that's an interesting one, and we probably need to do a whole session on valuations, maybe a whole series on valuation. This is always a sticking point. So I want to share with you a story. I was at a conference. It was called Face to Face with Entrepreneurs, where we get the entrepreneurs coming in, we get the investors coming in. And there was this one gentleman that was doing a dog leash. Great idea, by the way. When he came up, no, it's a dog leash where you don't get tangled. So if I'm a dog walker, I don't kill myself tripping over the thing. It was brilliant and well done. He had IP. However, he said, and my valuation is $62.5 million. This is pre-revenue. And he had an MVP. So, of course, in my gentle way, I said, I'll do the nice version. I think you're a little high. So I then I talked to him separately. About 2 weeks later, he came back and said, this is what happens when you listen to advisors who use a discounted cash flow based upon an Excel spreadsheet I set up, but valuations don't conform to a valuation that is for an ongoing company where there's revenue and where there's a residual. So he came back and said, my valuation's $4.5 million. And I said, now you're in the ballpark and I can help you find the right entity to try to find money from, to get equity from. That great story in retrospect.
That's a good one. And can I add that Carta and others that do 409A appraisals that companies use for their options sometimes use some of these advanced predictions and projections and overvalue a company when they shouldn't. So there are double-edged swords here about valuation. And
True,
by the
true.
way, let me give you the pitch. The Berkus method of valuation, which I formed in 1994, has been used by over 1 million startup and early stage companies over the years. And you'll find this listed about 35,000 times if you search for it. So there.
All right. So on to number 5.
Don't take money where the investor or lender supplies nothing other than cash. Dumb investment. Don't do it. Because this is a setup, by the way, for Tech Coast Angels and all the other angel groups where there's a lot of intelligence there behind that money, because dumb money just doesn't understand. And often when they don't understand the business, they can't contribute to it. And if they can't, I mean, contribute ideas and intelligence and support. And that kind of money is easier to get sometimes because others ask questions, but it certainly doesn't do much good for the business. And you'll find that out after you go through that money and then find you need more. David?
Yeah. So you clearly at TCA Venture Group, we clearly believe that we're smart money, and what we want to do is contribute to your success. Why is that? Because that's how we make money. We have there's a lot of sloth. In 10 deals, we'll see maybe 5, 6 go belly up pretty quickly, but we want to try to contribute so we can minimize the risk of failure, and we want to maximize the potential for success. So we want to be able to help. We want to be able to be on the board. We want to be on your advisory groups for marketing, sales, operations. And this goes back to actually your earlier point too. Don't take dumb money. Many of your relatives and all your friends are unsophisticated, and all you're doing is taking money and having, in a sense, if you're an entrepreneur, the aggravation of answering lots of questions that these people will ask on a regular basis, and it just detracts from doing the normal course of business.
So let me add to that. Just about every single member of these angel groups we're talking about, in our case it's TCA Venture Group, has a background in business, has gone through all of these things, has a background in investing, or they wouldn't have been a member of this group. When you take those two backgrounds together, there is so much knowledge that an entrepreneur can get. It's really a shame when they don't take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Number 6. And here it is. Don't walk away from rejection by experienced investors thinking that they're stupid and just don't get it. I've heard this from entrepreneurs whispered, stated, told to other entrepreneurs. That group just didn't get it, and so they didn't invest in my business. Well, there may have been a reason. So don't just walk away from it. David?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts of this that I think are very critical. Number 1 is when we engage with an entrepreneur and we try to understand the business, we ask very pointed questions. We also, at that time when we ask these questions, try to determine the character of the CEO, and also when we get with the rest of the team, the character of the team, because team is number 1, as you know.
Yep.
So by us asking questions, we can determine whether or not the entrepreneur and the team is coachable and whether or not there's arrogance on their side. I've heard before that you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, when you actually say that to us, we kind of have our hairs in the back of our heads stand up. Because of the 400 investors, we probably have some expertise in some area and pretty well in depth. The second point, and I want to point this out, is even if you get rejected as an entrepreneur, ask the question, why? What can we have done differently? Is it presentation? Is it the business side, or is it the investability side? Because each of us has a different investment thesis and a potential for return. So what we want to be able to do is have that balance of whether or not the business will succeed and whether or not the investment will succeed. So TCA Venture Group, all the TCA networks will, when the entrepreneurs go through the pre-screening and screening, provide feedback within 24 to 48 hours on what we liked, any concerns, and then we help them try to figure out ways to get around and ameliorate those concerns, because sometimes we have a strong no, we're not interested, but if it gets the screening, we're kind of interested. But sometimes we just need more data, we need more time, the entrepreneur needs more traction, so we give it a soft no. And we want to establish that clear relationship with the entrepreneur, because it's important, because it may come back, and we've had this happen. Companies have come back and said, hey, I've done this, I pivoted, I have now more traction. Would you be interested? And we've said, absolutely. And we look at that as coachability, and that's so critical.
Glad to hear that. And by the way, you just set me up for the next one. So do ask 3 sets of progressively deeper questions to get down to the heart of why the investor didn't invest. And usually, you've just heard it, a sophisticated investor group will tell you why. Otherwise, an unsophisticated investor may just say something that might just be hiding the fact that he or she doesn't want to put the money on the line, or it might be the fact they don't understand your business, or it might be the fact that they're a little bit worried about whether there'll ever be a return or liquidity or whoever knows what. But ask questions, find out why. Pretty good reason.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is a give and take. The questions help us probe whether or not this is an investable business. The questions also help the entrepreneur determine what they need to do. So could I flip it a little and provide some other things that I have heard, not financial, not from a funding point of view, that entrepreneurs kind of get trapped?
Not only will I do that, but I will do the magic of removing the thing from the screen and you're on. Go ahead, tell me what you think.
All right. So some other advice, and this is based upon doing this for 16 years. Now, I know I don't have as much experience as you do, but I have a very keen ear for listening to things that make my ears twitch.
Okay.
When we say, have you done market research? Did you do something with the customer? Have you asked customers? Sometimes we get blank stares. Sometimes they say, we don't know, this is just, or worse, we're just going to put it into the market and see what happens. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, you're speaking now of the entrepreneur and the lack of understanding about the process. And
Right.
This is another one. We're just going to make a list of all the shows we can put together based upon each of these subjects. And there's a good one too. Is sometimes the entrepreneur is a scientist or a marketing person or something where the view is very narrow, when in fact there are so many processes to getting a product or a service to market that we know, and we know where those problems normally show up, that the entrepreneur is blind to them. It will be a great show that we add to make this one happen.
Yeah. So the next one is, let's go back to the financial. The entrepreneur puts together a financial document. They get money. They feel really great. They have investors, and they spend wildly. I mean, I remember. I'm sure this has never happened to companies that you've been in. But I remember early in my life, I was the 100th employee of a company called MCI. Remember them? This goes back when I was a wee baby as a kid. I was, an engineer by training, so I worked with them, and I did N-Link microwave systems for MCI. And they were able to get a large amount of money. This is from a VC, because that's massive, infrastructure. And they spent it on a ton of things that kind of wasted money. Things like really nice office space, beautiful murals, paintings, adding people galore. You have to be frugal. And when we as investors say, be frugal on the things that are real critical, like marketing and sales, building your brand, we kind of get that poo-pooed. That's probably advice that every entrepreneur needs to listen to, and the investor needs to be able to probe, how are you going to spend my money, and how are we going to track this over a period of time? Thoughts?
Absolutely. First of all, you've read the story about Jeff Bezos and how at first all of his desks were just doors to rooms on top of sawhorses. That's the ultimate. But on the other side of it, I have seen several of my companies, meaning companies I've invested in, take the money that I've put into it and sign a 5-year office lease in a Class A spot, thinking that if they look successful, they would be successful. That ain't the way it works.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it with one final one before we run out of time.
Sure.
And this is something that I have learned over the years by, in a sense, being stupid when I was an early investor. I thought everything was Pollyanna and things would work out perfectly. It doesn't. Okay, things go bump in the night. So when we asked the entrepreneur, and we would work together with them, this is where smart money comes in handy. What are your risks? What are the 3 to 5 risks that would tear down the company, make it less investable in the future, make it less investable as a business? But not only identify those risks, figure out ways to mitigate the risk and bring them from being a high risk to moderate or low risk, or make it from a high impact to a medium or a low impact. For example, maybe look at different markets in which to sell. Maybe look at a different financing strategy that goes in stages versus just getting all the money at one time. I point that out because when I look back upon the deals in which I succeeded and the deals in which I failed, the failure on my part and the failure on many of the investor parts and also on the entrepreneur's parts is failure to identify and mollify and moderate these risks.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
In fact, the Berkus method of valuation is based upon de-risking, and the value is based upon reduced risk. I'll leave that until we get into the valuation methods in a future one. There's another possible future edition of Crossroads. So David, that'll probably wrap it up for today. We just probably created 5 new crossroads from discussions coming out of this last 20 minutes, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I appreciate this, Dave. I'm sure the listeners and the viewers, hopefully they've received a lot of value, because I think these points, and I think you're going to Berkutize, minutize these points in some kind of an Instagram or something like that, as well as we posting it. But I think this is so critical, and this advice is so important, especially now when money seems to be a little harder to come by.
Yep.
This will help the entrepreneurs, and I believe it will help the investors by looking at the other side of that coin.
And that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap. Until next time, this is David Friedman with my co-host Dave Berkus for TCA Crossroads, and see you next time.